Men have been taught to admire effort as though resistance were a sign of righteousness, as though strain itself were proof that one is moving in the correct direction. Yet this belief has quietly inverted their relationship with nature, for nothing in the natural order advances through tension, and nothing of lasting power is produced through force. Observe the motion of planets, the unfolding of plants, the transmission of electricity through a conductor, and you will find no struggle, only obedience to law. When effort dominates action, it is not virtue speaking, but misalignment announcing itself. Strain is not a badge of honor, it is a signal, and like all signals in a system, it points to friction where continuity should exist. The human being is a system no less than a dynamo or a resonant circuit, yet he alone insists on pushing against his own structure, applying will where understanding is required, exhausting himself not because the task is great, but because his internal state is contradictory. When one must force movement, it is because movement is not supported by the underlying frequency from which it arises. Effort appears where harmony is absent, just as heat appears where electrical resistance is high. The world has mistaken endurance for alignment, and in doing so has learned to glorify exhaustion while remaining blind to efficiency. You will notice that whenever an action feels heavy, delayed, or draining, it is not the action itself that is burdensome, but the internal opposition preceding it. Nature never argues with itself. A river does not debate whether to flow, nor does light hesitate before propagation. They move because their state permits movement. Man alone introduces hesitation, doubt, urgency, and self-contradiction, then calls the resulting friction effort. This is not strength, it is interference, and interference always demands energy to overcome what should not be present in the first place. The belief that achievement requires struggle has conditioned men to resist ease, to distrust simplicity, and to feel undeserving of outcomes that arrive without pain. Yet in engineering, the highest achievement is the reduction of loss, not the celebration of waste. A machine that vibrates violently is not praised for its passion, it is corrected for imbalance. Likewise, a life filled with strain is not evidence of ambition, but of miscollaboration. Where effort dominates, energy is being dissipated instead of directed. When alignment is correct, movement becomes inevitable rather than forced. One does not push electricity through a properly designed circuit. One simply closes the path and the current flows according to law. In the same manner, achievement is not something to be wrestled into existence, but something that emerges when internal conditions permit it. Effort is the sound of internal noise, and silence is the condition of power. Those who learn this cease glorifying struggle and begin correcting causes. The mind resists this understanding because it has been trained to equate difficulty with value. Yet difficulty is not intrinsic to creation, only to error. The more perfectly a system is aligned, the less effort it requires to produce extraordinary results. This is true in physics, in biology, and in the affairs of man. To continue insisting that struggle is necessary is to insist that inefficiency is noble, and this belief alone has delayed more lives than any external obstacle. When you feel exhausted by pursuit, do not ask how to try harder, but why resistance exists at all. Ask what internal contradiction is demanding this expenditure. Effort is never the cause of achievement, only the cost of disorder. Remove disorder, and effort dissolves. This is not philosophy, but mechanics applied inward. The future belongs not to those who strain, but to those who understand how to align. Effort is not power, it is proof of misalignment. Action has never been the origin of movement, only its visible consequence, and those who believe otherwise have spent their lives attempting to steer effects while ignoring causes. Before any motion occurs in a system, a state must first be established, and that state determines whether movement will be smooth or resisted. In electrical phenomena, current does not struggle forward, it obeys the conditions imposed upon it. When the potential is correct and the path is clear, flow is immediate and continuous. When the frequency is distorted, the same current becomes erratic, overheated, and destructive. Human action follows the same law, though few are trained to perceive it. What men call motivation is often nothing more than borrowed pressure applied to an internally incoherent state. They attempt to move the body while the mind vibrates in contradiction. They demand results while harboring fear of consequence. And they initiate effort while their emotional field is saturated with noise. Under such conditions, even simple actions feel heavy, delayed, and unnatural. This is not because action is difficult, but because the internal frequency from which it must arise is unstable. Action does not correct frequency. Frequency determines the quality of action. Frequency is not a mystical abstraction, but the sum of one's dominant emotional tone, habitual thought patterns, and internal expectation. It is the background signal upon which all behavior is transmitted. When this signal is distorted by anxiety, urgency, resentment, or doubt, action must fight through interference to occur. This creates the sensation of effort, and effort is experienced as fatigue, hesitation, or resistance. When frequency is coherent, the same action emerges without deliberation, as though it had been waiting for permission to move. You have felt this difference without naming it. There are moments when tasks complete themselves, when decisions feel obvious, and when movement arises without internal debate. These moments are not accidents. They occur when internal frequency temporarily aligns with outcome. Most men treat such moments as rare gifts, unaware that alignment can be cultivated deliberately. They attempt to repeat the action but fail to reproduce the state, and then conclude that ease is unreliable. In truth, they have reversed cause and effect. To adjust frequency, one does not add effort, but removes noise. Noise consists of unresolved emotion, divided intention, and unconscious expectation of struggle. These distort the signal long before action begins. When the internal field is calm, action requires no encouragement. The body moves as a consequence of clarity, not compulsion. Just as a resonant system responds most efficiently at its natural frequency, a human being performs most effortlessly when internal conditions match the outcome being pursued. This explains why discipline without calibration leads to exhaustion. One can force behavior temporarily, just as one can force current through resistance, but the cost is heat and eventual breakdown. True discipline is not constant exertion, but constant alignment. It is the maintenance of an internal state that makes correct action the path of least resistance. When frequency precedes action, effort becomes unnecessary, and persistence becomes automatic. Many confuse this with passivity, yet nothing could be further from truth. Alignment does not eliminate action, it eliminates friction. Movement still occurs, but it occurs without internal opposition. The mind no longer argues with itself, and the body no longer resists instruction. What appears from the outside as ease is, from within, coherence. This is the condition under which sustained achievement becomes possible without depletion. If action has exhausted you, it is not because you are weak, nor because the goal is too large, but because you have been attempting to move from a distorted state. Correct the state, and movement reorganizes itself. This is the unseen foundation upon which all effortless achievement rests. Until frequency is addressed, action will remain heavy. Once frequency is aligned, action becomes inevitable. Frequency precedes action, and alignment dissolves efforts. Internal resistance does not announce itself loudly, nor does it present as a single obstacle that can be confronted and removed. It operates quietly as contradiction within the system, as competing instructions issued simultaneously, each canceling the other while consuming energy. A machine given opposing commands does not refuse to operate out of defiance, it stalls because coherence has been lost. In the same way, a human being experiences effort not because the path is blocked, but because the internal signal is divided before motion even begins. When a man declares an intention while secretly expecting failure, he introduces drag into his own movement. When he desires an outcome while fearing its consequences, he fractures the current that would otherwise carry him forward. Thought pulls in one direction, emotion in another, and action is forced to compensate for the disagreement. This compensation is experienced as strain. The mind then misinterprets this strain as proof that the task is difficult, rather than recognizing it as evidence of internal contradiction. Doubt is not a neutral state. It is an active interference pattern. Fear is not caution. It is resistance to imagined consequence. Divided intention is not complexity. It is inefficiency. Each of these states introduces opposing frequencies into the system, and where frequencies conflict, energy is consumed without producing motion. This is why effort increases precisely when clarity decreases. The system spends its power resolving internal conflict instead of producing external result. Most men attempt to solve this problem at the level of action. They attempt to overpower hesitation with will, to drown doubt with repetition, to outrun fear with urgency. Yet urgency is itself a distortion, and force only amplifies the noise already present. One cannot correct interference by increasing volume. One must remove contradiction at its source. Until the internal field is unified, effort will remain the tax paid for disorder. Observe how quickly action becomes light when decision is complete. When there is no debate, no internal argument, no imagined penalty, movement requires no persuasion. The body responds instantly to clear instruction. This clarity is not optimism, nor confidence in appearance, but agreement within. When thought, expectation, and emotional tone point in the same direction, the system no longer leaks energy. Action becomes efficient because resistance has been eliminated, not overcome. The subconscious plays no favorites. It does not respond to declared goals, but to dominant signals. If fear is stronger than intention, fear governs. If doubt is louder than desire, doubt determines outcome. This is not punishment, but mechanics. The subconscious enforces coherence by withdrawing support from divided commands. What men call procrastination is often the subconscious refusing to amplify a conflicted instruction. To resolve internal resistance, one must not demand belief, but remove opposition. This requires honesty rather than affirmation, precision rather than enthusiasm. Identify the conflicting signal and neutralize it, not through denial, but through understanding. When contradiction dissolves, energy returns. Effort decreases not because ambition has weakened, but because coherence has been restored. Until a man ceases arguing with himself, he will continue mistaking resistance for challenge and effort for virtue. Yet the moment internal agreement is achieved, movement reorganizes itself without force. This is the silent threshold between struggle and ease. Those who cross it no longer push against life. They allow life to move through them according to law. Internal contradiction creates resistance, and coherence restores powers. Imagination has been degraded into fantasy by those who do not understand its function, yet it is one of the most exact instruments available to the human system when properly employed. It is not an escape from reality, but a means of preparing the system to receive reality without resistance. Every invention I have brought into material form was first constructed with absolute precision in the internal field, not as a wish, but as a completed operation observed in advance. What men dismiss as imagination is in truth rehearsal at the level where effort is least expensive and correction is most efficient. A system cannot move smoothly toward an outcome it has not internally organized. When the mind lacks a clear internal representation, action must improvise blindly, and improvisation demands effort. Imagination, when disciplined, removes this burden by resolving uncertainty before motion begins. It allows the nervous system to familiarize itself with sequence, proportion, and outcome, so that when action occurs, it proceeds as recognition rather than discovery. Ease arises not from chance, but from prior internal order. Most people misuse imagination by allowing it to wander, exaggerate, or contradict itself. They imagine outcomes while simultaneously imagining failure, judgment, or loss, and then conclude that imagination is unreliable. In reality, they have introduced interference into the very mechanism meant to eliminate it. Imagination is effective only when it is precise, calm, and sensory complete. Vague images produce vague results, just as poorly defined circuits produce unstable current. When properly applied, imagination functions as a tuning process. The internal system is brought into resonance with a specific configuration before any external demand is made. This resonance reduces hesitation because the unknown has been converted into the familiar. The body responds more readily to what it recognizes than to what it must guess. Thus, what appears effortless in execution is merely the continuation of a process already completed internally. This is why disciplined imagination requires neutrality rather than excitement. Excess emotion distorts signal clarity. The goal is not stimulation, but coherence. One must observe the desired outcome as an engineer observes a finished machine, noting its function, sequence, and stability without emotional excess. When imagination is calm, it imprints order. When it is agitated, it imprints noise. The difference determines whether action will feel natural or forced. In mental rehearsal, correction occurs without consequence. One can adjust sequence, timing, and response without expenditure of physical energy. This alone makes imagination the most economical domain of work. By the time action is required, the system has already learned the path. Movement then follows familiarity rather than command. The hands know where to go because the mind has already been there. Those who dismiss imagination as unrealistic fail to see that all creation precedes manifestation. Nothing appears without first being structured. Nature itself operates this way. Form emerges from pattern, pattern from vibration, and vibration from state. Imagination is the human capacity to participate consciously in this sequence. It is not wishful thinking, but pre-alignment. When effortlessness is observed in those who perform with exceptional consistency, it is rarely because they exert less discipline, but because they have resolved complexity in advance. Their actions appear fluid because decision has already occurred. They are not thinking their way through movement. They are executing what has already been internally accepted as real. This acceptance is not belief, but familiarity. To use imagination correctly is to treat it as a laboratory rather than a theater. One does not dramatize outcomes, one stabilizes them. One does not escape into images, one returns from them with clarity. When imagination is used in this manner, it becomes a mechanism of ease, reducing effort by eliminating uncertainty. Action then becomes the final expression of an already completed process. Imagination aligns the system, and aligned systems move without strain. Urgency is often mistaken for seriousness, yet it is one of the most disruptive forces within any system because it introduces time pressure where timing must instead be respected. When urgency dominates the internal state, the system accelerates without coordination, and acceleration without coherence produces strain. In nature, speed is never pursued independently of order. Lightning follows a precise path, and even the most violent storm obeys structure. Human urgency, by contrast, is usually a reaction to fear, and fear always distorts frequency before action begins. The sensation of needing something to happen immediately is not evidence that it should, but evidence that the internal state is unstable. Urgency compresses perception, narrows attention, and amplifies noise. Decisions made under urgency are rarely aligned, because alignment requires stillness long enough for coherence to establish itself. When the mind is rushed, it cannot listen to the system it inhabits. It commands instead of calibrates, and command without understanding creates resistance. Detachment is misunderstood as indifference, yet true detachment is precision. It is the ability to hold an outcome without clinging to its timing, without emotional volatility, and without self-identification with success or delay. This neutrality stabilizes frequency. When expectation is calm, the system remains receptive. When expectation is urgent, the system contracts. Contraction increases resistance, and resistance demands effort to overcome what urgency itself created. Observe how easily action unfolds when the outcome is desired but not demanded. There is clarity without tension, intention without pressure, and movement without haste. This state allows information to surface, opportunities to present themselves, and correct sequence to reveal itself naturally. Urgency blocks this process by forcing premature motion. It insists on movement before conditions are prepared, and then blames the world when resistance appears. Stillness is not inactivity. It is the condition under which correct signals can be distinguished from noise. In stillness, frequency stabilizes, and when frequency is stable, alignment holds. From this state, action emerges at the appropriate moment without deliberation. What appears from the outside as patience is, internally, readiness without agitation. The system waits not because it is unsure, but because it is listening. Many exhaust themselves by mistaking emotional intensity for commitment. They attempt to prove desire through pressure, unaware that pressure repels the very outcomes it seeks. Nature does not respond to insistence, only to compatibility. When internal state matches external requirement, connection occurs. When it does not, no amount of urgency will force resonance. Detachment restores compatibility by removing excess signal. Neutral expectation allows outcomes to arrive without distortion. It does not mean abandoning desire, but releasing the internal tension that insists on immediate confirmation. This release returns energy to the system. Effort decreases because resistance has been dissolved, not because ambition has diminished. Calm expectation is not passive waiting, but stable readiness. When struggle disappears, it is often because urgency has been replaced by trust in sequence. This trust is not belief without evidence, but understanding of law. One who understands that effects emerge from prepared conditions does not rush effects. He refines conditions. From this refinement, movement occurs with minimal expenditure. Effortlessness is preserved not by pushing harder, but by refusing to disturb alignment with unnecessary pressure. Urgency fractures coherence. Detachment restores it. Where detachment exists, strain cannot survive. Where strain disappears, achievement unfolds as a consequence rather than a conquest. Urgency creates strain, and calm expectation preserves alignments. Time is not an adversary to be defeated, but a sequence to be understood, and those who experience effortlessness without patience have misunderstood both effort and time. Every process unfolds according to order, and order cannot be rushed without distortion. In electrical transmission, synchronization determines efficiency. In biological growth, sequence determines viability. In human achievement, timing determines ease. When men attempt to accelerate results without respecting sequence, they introduce resistance where none was required, and then misinterpret that resistance as fate or limitation. Effortlessness does not imply immediacy. It implies correctness of progression. A seed does not strain to become a tree, yet it does not become one overnight. Its ease lies in obedience to sequence, not in defiance of duration. Those who force timing fracture alignment by demanding outcomes before supporting conditions are complete. This demand destabilizes frequency, and instability reintroduces effort. The impatience to arrive is itself a form of resistance to the present configuration. Sequence governs all natural systems. Current must follow a path, growth must follow stages, understanding must follow integration. When action attempts to skip stages, compensation is required, and compensation consumes energy. What men experience as delay is often preparation in progress. What they experience as stagnation is often an internal adjustment not yet completed. To interfere with this process is to convert ease into struggle. Patience is not endurance of discomfort, but cooperation with law. It is the absence of interference during necessary intervals. A system aligned with its sequence remains stable even when motion is temporarily invisible. This stability preserves energy and prevents the oscillation that urgency introduces. When patience is absent, oscillation increases, and oscillation demands correction. Correction is effort. Thus, impatience does not shorten time, it lengthens the path. Trust in sequence does not eliminate action, it refines it. Action taken at the correct moment requires less force, less correction, and less recovery. Action taken prematurely requires constant adjustment. In engineering, timing errors are more costly than power deficiencies. The same principle applies inwardly. When the internal state attempts to outrun readiness, it must continuously compensate for imbalance, and this compensation is felt as fatigue. Natural flow is not random, it is structured progression. To move with it, one must recognize when to act and when to allow consolidation. Consolidation is not idleness, it is the integration of previous input into stable configuration. Without consolidation, progress is superficial and fragile. With it, progress becomes cumulative and resilient. Those who learn this cease measuring advancement by visible motion alone. Many confuse patience with passivity because they have been trained to equate movement with progress. Yet movement without alignment is noise. Stillness that allows sequence to complete is preparation. The difficulty lies not in waiting, but in trusting that the system knows how to organize itself when not disrupted. This trust is intellectual, not emotional. It arises from understanding that law governs outcomes more reliably than force. Effortlessness survives only when timing is honored. When one respects the interval required for internal and external conditions to synchronize, action emerges spontaneously at the appropriate moment. This emergence feels obvious rather than forced, because it occurs when resistance has naturally decayed. What appears as patience from the outside is, internally, precision in timing. To achieve without strain, one must relinquish the illusion that speed equals effectiveness. Effectiveness is the alignment of action with moment. When moment and movement coincide, effort disappears. When they diverge, struggle begins. Time cannot be compressed without consequence, but it can be used intelligently. Those who understand this no longer hurry results, they prepare conditions and allow sequence to complete its work. Effortlessness requires right timing, and right timing emerges from respecting sequence. When alignment is complete, action does not require encouragement, nor does it ask permission. It appears as the natural continuation of a state already established, as inevitable as discharge following potential. In such moments, movement feels neither courageous nor strenuous, but obvious, as though the system were merely completing a circuit long prepared. This is the point at which effort vanishes, not because the goal has diminished, but because resistance has been eliminated at every prior level. Inspired action is often misunderstood as impulse or intuition without structure, yet it is neither accidental nor emotional. It is the behavioral expression of coherence. When thought, expectation, emotion, and timing converge, action emerges without debate. There is no internal negotiation, no weighing of alternatives, no need for discipline to force compliance. The body responds because the instruction is unambiguous. What men call hesitation exists only where instruction is unclear. Those who push themselves into motion before alignment is complete mistake urgency for inspiration. True inspired action carries no agitation. It does not shout. It does not rush. It simply presents itself as the only logical next step. This quality distinguishes alignment-driven movement from compulsive effort. Compulsion feels heavy and draining. Inspired action feels light and self-sustaining, even when the task itself is demanding. Clarity is the silent architect of this state. When clarity exists, choice collapses into inevitability. There is no need to motivate action when no alternative feels viable. The system moves because stillness would now be incoherent. This is why aligned individuals often report feeling carried rather than driven. They are not being pushed by desire or fear, but pulled by internal consistency. Effort disappears at this stage because energy is no longer spent resolving internal conflict. All available power is directed outward into execution. The same action that once required persuasion now requires only attention. The system has accepted the outcome as its own, and behavior reorganizes itself accordingly. This acceptance is not emotional attachment, but structural agreement. From the outside, such action is often misinterpreted as confidence or talent. In truth, it is the absence of interference. When resistance is removed, even ordinary capacity produces extraordinary results. The individual no longer battles himself, and this alone multiplies effectiveness. What appears effortless is merely unopposed. This is why those who act from alignment rarely feel the need to explain themselves. Explanation belongs to uncertainty. When action is inevitable, justification is unnecessary. Movement proceeds because it must, not because it is defended. The energy once spent on doubt, rehearsal, and self-questioning is now converted directly into progress. It is important to understand that automatic action does not imply lack of awareness. On the contrary, it arises from heightened awareness. The system recognizes the precise moment when conditions have converged and responds instantly. This response is intelligent, not reflexive. It is the culmination of calibration, not its substitute. When effort returns, it is a sign that alignment has been disturbed. Perhaps timing was ignored, urgency reintroduced, or contradiction allowed to resurface. Effort is diagnostic. It reveals where coherence has weakened. Those who understand this do not condemn effort, but investigate it. They restore alignment, and action resumes its natural course. At this stage, achievement ceases to feel like conquest and begins to feel like completion. The work does not end, but the struggle does. Action becomes the automatic consequence of being correctly arranged within oneself. Once this arrangement is stable, movement no longer requires force. It occurs because it cannot do otherwise. Aligned action is automatic, and automatic action requires no force. Effortless achievement is not a technique to be applied intermittently, but a state of being maintained through understanding. When alignment becomes habitual, results cease to feel extraordinary because they arise as a natural expression of internal order. One no longer waits for permission from circumstance, nor demands confirmation from outcome. The system functions according to law, and law does not negotiate. In this state, success is not pursued, it is encountered. As consequence follows configuration without appeal. Being is prior to doing, and doing is prior to having. Those who reverse this sequence exhaust themselves attempting to acquire effects without first stabilizing causes. When being is coherent, doing organizes itself. When doing is coherent, having follows without strain. This sequence is not philosophical preference but structural necessity. To live in alignment is to accept that outcomes are generated by state, not by force. Internal stillness is the stabilizer of this state. Stillness does not suppress movement, it eliminates turbulence. A system free of turbulence transmits energy efficiently. When the internal field is quiet, perception sharpens, timing refines, and action emerges with precision. The mind ceases to oscillate between alternatives, and the body ceases to resist instruction. One becomes dependable to oneself, and this dependability is the foundation of all sustained accomplishment. In such a condition, identity shifts subtly, but decisively. One no longer asks whether something can be achieved, but whether it is aligned with the present configuration. Desire is no longer inflated by urgency, nor diminished by doubt. It is assessed, calibrated, and integrated. When integration is complete, movement follows as a matter of course. The individual lives as an extension of principle rather than a negotiator with circumstance. This state is often mistaken for detachment from ambition, yet it is ambition refined. Ambition without alignment seeks intensity. Ambition with alignment seeks correctness. The latter endures. Results accumulate quietly because resistance has been removed at the source. The individual becomes predictable in the best sense, not because he repeats himself, but because law repeats itself through him. Living in this manner requires vigilance without tension. Alignment must be maintained, not defended. Noise must be identified and removed, not battled. When interference appears, it is corrected without drama. The system returns to coherence, and movement resumes. This simplicity is not the product of naivete but of mastery. Mastery is the absence of unnecessary effort. Those who arrive here do not proclaim arrival. There is nothing to announce. Life continues, work continues, challenges continue, yet struggle does not. Difficulty is addressed as adjustment, not as proof of inadequacy. The individual trusts sequence, honors timing, and refines state. Outcomes arrive with regularity, because conditions are maintained with discipline. Effortlessness, then, is not an escape from responsibility, but the highest form of it. One becomes responsible for internal order, knowing that external order will follow. This responsibility is precise, unemotional, and continuous. It does not rely on inspiration, only on maintenance. When maintenance is consistent, creation becomes reliable. In this state, the future no longer threatens, nor does the past constrain. Attention rests where power exists, in the present configuration. From this position, one moves without anxiety and receives without surprise. Achievement feels complete because it is no longer sought as validation. It is simply the visible record of an invisible arrangement correctly sustained. Effortless achievement is the natural result